Hi guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about SQLite with Godot. And first, we have to talk about, well, what is SQL and what is SQLite? Well, SQL is a language. It's called a structured queried language, and what it's used to ask a database, in this case SQLite, questions. It's asking it various questions about the data and about what kind of data is in that database. So what is a database? Well, a database is just a table that holds information. Well, it's tables, there's multiple of them. And think of it kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, but multiple Excel spreadsheets in a single file that you can use SQL, which is structured queried language, to ask questions about the tables and to relate different tables together. We call that joining. But why would you want to use a database over top of something like JSON? Well, first you can query the database, right? You can ask it questions using SQL. You can look up data from a database extremely rapidly over top of doing something like JSON, where you have to load all of that data in. Instead, you could just ask it, hey, can I have the weapons that this character has? And it'll pull that information, versus doing a dedicated JSON file for it. You would have a table that would house just what weapons the user would carry, and then it would reference all of that extra data in a separate table. But you can also do things like joining two different tables together. So you can say, based off of this character ID and this table of weapons, I can find out which characters have which weapons at what time. So your data will have a built-in structure to it, which is fantastic. Where JSON, everything's kind of unstructured. It just lets you kind of dump it all out into however you would like it to be. Databases have a very specific structure designed into them before you start putting data into it. And the reason why that's useful is it keeps everything extremely organized, and you want your stuff to be organized with every single project that you make. They are extremely fault tolerant, meaning if something blows up in the database, it'll actually roll back and save your data. Whereas if your JSON data were to get corrupted, unless you build in some kind of correction system, it's not going to be able to load that data, and that in a lot of video games is a problem. Finally, databases scale extremely well. So when you have a small project, a database doesn't really make sense. But if you have something that, like for instance, if you have something like Skyrim and you choose to save all of the different characters with their weapons and their data and their health and their spells and things like that, you can just structure it in such a way that you could have a table of characters, a table of spells, a table of weapons, and you would be able to create relations in between all of those tables, and you wouldn't have to house all that data in memory. You could just house it on the database and load it when you need it, versus loading all of that data at once on application load. So with all of that being said, databases are extremely important. They're efficient, and for most medium scale, for most projects that are bigger than a small project, I highly suggest you guys use a database. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through how to make a connection to a database. I'm going to talk about the frameworks that we use to connect to a SQL database with Godot, and I am going to show you how to select and to insert data into a database, so that way you guys can have a good primer on what you guys need to do to get started with database. So with that being said, let me go ahead and jump over to the framework, and then we will get started. All right, so we're sitting here in Godot, and what we're gonna do first is we're gonna create ourselves a new scene. It doesn't really matter what type of scene you guys create, because we're not gonna go in and create an entire scene. It's not really necessary, but what we'll do is we'll just click a 3D scene, just because I decided a 3D scene will work. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over to the asset lib, and we are going to type in SQLite. We're going to hit enter, and you will see that we have two options here. Now, I like the Godot SQLite by Too Shady for You, so we will go ahead and click that and download it. So you'll see here, we're going to download it. It'll take a few seconds, and then we're going to go ahead and click install. You'll see that we get all of these really cool DLLs and things like that. So we'll click install. You'll see package installed successfully. Okay, so now that we got the framework installed, what we're gonna do is we will right click, we will attach a script here, and we're gonna call it, let's say main system, right? All right, so now that this is created, what we'll do is we will first see that it extends spiral, which is fine. And what we'll do is we will add a constant. So const, and what a constant is it's a variable that can't be changed. And then what we'll do is we will go SQLite, and then n is equal to preload, because we're gonna preload this asset. Res, well actually I think it'll just autocomplete if I allow it to. Yeah, right there. So what we'll do is we'll preload, which what this does is it loads the asset into memory before your scene loads, or right when your scene loads. So we'll go ahead and pick the GNDS here, which is basically the wrapper for this library. And then we'll go ahead and hit enter on that, and we will hit enter. And then we're going to create a variable and call it DB, because we want it to be our database, and we want to have var our DB underscore name is equal to, let's see, this will be our path, okay? So this is our database, and this is our path to our database. So if I go ahead and hit here and go DB path, or I should say path to DB. And if we go here and we comment with the hashtag, we will call this the actual database. So database object. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function here. So func fnc commit data to DB. And we're going to go ahead and create our database. So DB is equal to SQLite.new. And then db.path is equal to our DB name. Now that we have this written here, we need to actually come up with a path to our database. So what we can do is we'll right click here, and I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it data store. All right, and then what we're gonna do is we'll right click and open in file manager. So that's gonna open Windows's file manager to that location. And we're gonna need a tool to allow us to open and create databases. Now I have a favorite of mine, and I'll bring it up real quick. So we'll go to Google, and then we'll type in SQLite DB browser. If you open this up here, this is SQLite or this is DB browser for SQLite, and what we'll do is we will download this. So come up here to the downloads and click on the zip. I do no installer for 64-bit Windows because I don't want to run through the install, but you guys are welcome to if you'd like. Now go ahead and download and install that, and I will open it up for you guys momentarily. So once you download and extract it, you will see that there's a DB browser for SQLite, and we will open this. We're going to scroll down, and there is a DB browser for SQLite. We'll double click on that, and it's going to open this little tool. Now, what you can do is you can click New Database, and it'll ask you where do you want to place it. Well, I want to place it in my data store, so we will hit Control A, Control C, Control V. And you'll see that there is no items that match our search because we haven't created a database here. So we will call it database.db. What it's going to do is it's going to ask us to say player info, let's say. What we're going to do is we're going to click add, and we're going to say ID. And the reason why you want to add an ID field is a unique generated. Well, it's a unique incremented. We'll say type is going to be an integer, and then we will say not null, private key, auto increment, and unique. Now, what that means is the field cannot be null, so you can't put in empty data, and it wouldn't accept it if you tried. Private key means it is the key to that table. So if you want to reference to that table, that would be how you would reference that table. Auto increment means it's going to automatically increment your number. So when you insert a new row, it will increment +1. And unique will guarantee that it is unique. So if for some reason you insert data and it doesn't happen to be unique, you will get an error. Now we're going to go ahead and add another field, and we're going to name it name, let's say, and we will do text. And I'm okay with it not being null or any of that stuff. That's fine. And we will go ahead and add another field. We'll say score. Let's just say, we're making a scoreboard or something like that. All right. And then we'll say an integer for the score. Now, there are 5 options here. One is integer, that is a number. Text, which is text. Blob, which is a group of data, basically. A real, which is just a number. And a numeric, which is another type of number. What we're going to do is we're going to do integer, and we're going to hit OK. All right, so now we have player info here. So if you click this and you bring this down, you'll see that there is a player info section here. And what you can do is if you click over to browse data, you can actually see data, or you could see what's in this table. So if we were to click this button right here, that would allow us to add in a row. So you can see how it did an automatic 1. And if we type name, let's say like test user, score of 15. Now you can see how it holds that data in a structured format. So you can put in data just like that. So now you have your username and their score. But what if we wanted to tie something like their inventory to a player, right? So what we could do is if we go back to database structure and we click create table, let's just say items. Well, we'll say item inventory. We'll click add, and we'll call ID, because you always want an ID field, and we'll hit not null, private key, auto increment, unique. And then we will add another field, call it name, and we will say it is text. And then we'll add another field and put in a player ID. And we'll call that integer, not null, and that will be about it. So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, here's an ID of an object, here's the name of the object, and then here's the player that owns that object. So now, if we come over to browse data, and we click on this little player info, or this little table drop down, and then click on item inventory, and we click the plus icon, and then I say, let's say, sword is linked to what player? Well, if we go back to our player table, you'll see that there's a 1. So let's go ahead and go back to our item inventory and say 1. And that's how you go ahead and link tables to each other. Now, this links them to each other, but it doesn't allow you to select that data. Now, I'm not going to go through how to make a selection statement and things like that, but I'll at least go through some of the stuff, and I'll drop some stuff in the description below for you guys to kind of do some more further research. But if you want to select something, you say select star from player, right? Player info, and if I hit play, you'll see that it pulls that data. Same thing if I do select star from inventory. I believe it's called inventory. No, it's item inventory. Item inventory. And then we hit go, you'll see that it pulls that data. But what if we want to link back, we want to get all of the items that a player has? Well, what we can do is we can say select star from player info, and then left join item inventory is equal to, or item inventory on player info dot ID is equal to item inventory dot player ID. And what that will do is it'll pull back the character with their weapon that they have. And I can also do stuff like, let's say I add another player in here, and I call this test user 2, and I give him a score of 300, and I give him, if we go over to the inventory, I give him, whoops, I don't want to get rid of the sword. Let's say super, super, amazing sword, and then I create another table and I say, oh, I don't want to get rid of my thing, so super amazing bow and player ID of 2 and player ID of 2. Now you'll see that when I execute my SQL, it'll come back with 2 of the same user with their weapons. But what if I only want to get one of these characters? Well, that's where a where statement comes in. So where ID is equal to 2. You'll notice that this will fail. And the reason why is because we need to say player info.id is equal to 2. And you'll see that it just comes back with that information. Now that's all well and good, but how are we going to get this to Godot, right? So what we'll do is we will say or write our changes so that they get written out to that database, and then we'll go back into Godot. So what I can do is I can go ahead and put my var db name to wherever my data storage is located. So in this case, it's res:/, right? Data store / database. And if I remember correctly, it's database. Let me double check real quick. It is database.db. So database, that will work. So db is equal to SQLite new, and db path is equal to db name. What do we need to do now? Well, what we need to do is we need to open that database. So if we go db.opendb, so once we open the database, then what we must do is we must tell it what table we want to access. So if we do var table name is equal to, let's say, let's see what our table was called. Let me see. Our table was called player info. So we will say table name is player info. We're going to need to make a dictionary. So var dict is :dictionary. Okay, is equal to a dictionary. Sorry, C# is getting to me. And then we'll say dict this quotes, and we're going to need to look at our SQL here. So we need to insert, because we're going to be doing an insert here. So what we need to do is we need to tell it the data we want to insert. So if we go to player info, test user, and score. So name and score. So we'll say dict name is equal to, this is a test user, and then dict score is equal to 5,000, and then finally we can go db.insert row table name, comma, and then the dictionary that we're trying to put in. So now if we call this, okay, what we can do is we can go ahead and run this scene, and I haven't saved this yet, so we'll save it as SQLite tutorial, and you will see when I run this, it's going to put out some information right here that says opened database successfully, and then database.db. Now, if we open up our database now, and we refresh our table, you will notice this is a test user has been inserted into the database. So that's how simple it is to get SQLite to work with Godot. So if I go ahead and minimize this, and let's say I want to read that data, if we create another function, a func read from DB, and what we'll do is we'll go DB is equal to SQLite.new, because we want to we will recreate our instance of SQLite just so I mean, we don't have to. We could probably, I think that's what we'll do. We'll refactor this a tiny bit. We'll pull this out into the ready statement. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably a good idea just to pull all of this out. It'll make things a little easier later. So then we could just do this, and then we could do db dot open db. And then what we'll do is we will say db dot. So then what we'll say is var table name is equal to player info again. And then we will say we will say db.query. And it's easier for me to do this when I have some information here. So let me force that so that it gives me the proper syntax. db.select rows. And you can actually use this to select your rows. Now, I'm not going to do it this way. I prefer doing run query instead, or just query. Because querying allows me to write my query statement, and as somebody that's used SQL for a long time, writing my own query statements is just better for me. So query quote select star from, and we will space plus table name plus quote semicolon. Now, this might seem kind of not smart, right? Because it seems kind of dumb, right? You're putting a table name. You could just put player info, right? And then semicolon, and then be done. Now, we could do that, but if I want to make this into a generic function, having the pluses is a better method, if that makes sense. Having the concatenation of strings is better. So let's go ahead and do for I in range. All right, 0, comma db dot query result dot size. So we're going to get our query result dot size. And then what we'll do is we will put a semicolon or a colon here, and then we will say print query result space comma, and then db.query result. I know this is kind of confusing, so I'll go through and I'll explain it in a second. I, and then quote name, comma, and I will just take this right here, I'll paste it, space, get rid of the last comma, and do score. So what is this going to do? Well, what it does, okay, is it creates us a new DB instance. Now, again, I'm going to be removing this once my code is completed, which I guess now is a good time. I'm going to open my database. I'm going to create my player info table. I'm going to select everything from that table. And then I'm going to say, for everything that you get back, go ahead and print it out to the console. So you'll see down here in this area where I'm clicking, you will see here all of those SQL query statement or SQL data all get printed out to the console. So what we'll do is we'll say commit data to DB and then read from DB. And it should, in theory, as long as I've done everything correctly, it should it should insert a player, and then it should select all those players from the database. So let's go ahead and hit play. Yeah, I'll select my main scene. And then you'll see query results. Test user 15, query results, test user 23, test user 5000, and test user 5000. Now, the reason why we have 2 is because we just reinserted it here. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, so that's the basics of getting and sending data to databases. Now, if you guys want to jump off now is the time. I'm going to show you how to join data and return it back to an object, and then we're just going to console log it after this. But it's up to you guys if you guys want to jump off. But if not, you can stick with me and we'll do a quick join statement and then pull back all the data that we pulled back in the database. So what we're going to do is we'll do function, and we will say get items by user ID, and we're going to take in an ID. And because I'm extremely lazy as a coder, I am not going to rewrite all of this. So what we'll do is we will pull all of this data here. We're going to paste that. And we're going to say up here, I'm going to get rid of this because this is a very specific function. So let me do this from player info join. If I remember correctly, I had left join player. Yep, we'll just take that. Where, let me see, player info.id is equal to, and then I will put a plus symbol here, ID. And that will allow me to select all the data and join it back, right? Now, we're going to run into some issues here because we don't actually want all of this data to come back, right? We really just want the username and the name of this. So let's modify our SQL a tiny bit to make it a little bit more efficient here. So we'll say instead of select star, let's do select player info.name, comma, item inventory dot name. And that should just return those two. And what we're also going to do is we're going to say as p name and as I name. That way we have a name for a unique identifier that we can use. So if I take this SQL statement, because I want to make sure that it works, we'll just select this. We'll reopen up our DB browser, and then we'll say where player ID is equal to 1, and we're going to run it. And you'll notice that there's some errors here. No such table as left. So let's take a look. So you see here, I have join, left join. That's a problem. So let's get rid of that. And you see that it comes back with just what we expected. So if I come back here and I find where that extra join is and I remove it. So let's go find it, click. I keep clicking the wrong thing. It's killing me. Join right here. If I get rid of that, now I can just return these query results. Okay. So let's just go ahead and return all of our query results, right? Because we got a list of things, right? So we can just do return our db.query underscore results, or result, I guess. Don't want to put the S at the end. And we don't need to worry. Well, we can use this as kind of a debug, but that should work with what we want to do. So if I get rid of these two commits, because I don't want to do that right now, and we do get items by user ID, and I set it to 1, and then I go ahead and refresh my Godot instance. Oh, you notice that we got an error here. Invalid operations, string and int operator plus. So let's see what's going on. So it looks like our mistake is that we're trying to pass in an integer here, and it's mad because it's saying like, hey, hold on a minute, you're passing in an integer. So you need to tell it to be a string. So it should be str and then wrap it in that. And that should force it to be a string, in theory. And I say in theory because I'll be honest with you, I've never needed to do it. So let's go ahead and refresh it and let's see what it does. All right, so you'll see query results test user sword. So it successfully did what we wanted. So if we do a var item result is equal to get user by ID, and then we put a breakpoint here. When we refresh and run through our select, when it pauses here, we'll be able to take a look and you'll see that our item result has the dictionary that we're looking for, the P name and the I name. Now, of course, you can name it whatever you want, but I use P name and I name because I'm a heathen. But this is why SQL's super useful. Whereas if you throw something out in JSON, you need to do a lot of your linking up inside of your code. In SQL, you don't need to do your linking up in code. You can do it in the database instead, which is faster and it's more memory efficient. So that's the reason why I absolutely suggest that you guys use it. But that is the basics of doing your SQL statements. Now, if you guys want me to go more in depth into SQL itself, hit me up in the comments below and I will be more than happy to create a SQL only tutorial. But I believe that's going to do it for us, guys. I mean, all I did was I went through how to set up a database, how to set up a SQLite database, how to set up a basic open database, how to query that database, how to select from that database, and how to insert into that database and do basic joining on a database. That's 90% of what you guys need to know anyway. So from here, you guys can go ahead and start making some really amazing stuff. So anyway, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And, I'll see y'all next time. Thanks.